Imagine a nation reduced to ash, its cities incinerated, its people starving, its empire gone. In 1945, Japan wasn't just defeated, it was annihilated. And yet, within a single generation, it would rise to become the world's second largest economy, producing cars, electronics, and ships that conquered global markets.
So how did Japan decide to manage its economy so differently from the rest of the world?
How did a shattered nation pull off one of the greatest economic resurrections in history? This was no accident. It was the result of a radical reconstruction, one shaped by both external forces and internal resolve. Under the American occupation, led by General Douglas MacArthur, Japan was rebuilt from the ground up. Land reform dismantled centuries of feudal power. A new constitution enshrined democracy and pacifism. Billions in U.S. aid flowed in, not as charity, but as an investment in stability during the Cold War. This assistance was crucial for Japan's recovery and represented approximately 15% of the nation's imports during that time. During the Cold War, Japan became the workshop of the free world. By the 1950s and 60s, its economy was growing at nearly 10% a year. This was no ordinary recovery, it was an explosion. So, what drove this exponential growth? Behind the scenes, the state played a powerful role. The Ministry of International Trade and Industry, known simply as MITI, coordinated industrial policy. Capital was steered toward strategic sectors. Banks formed tight relationships with corporations in so-called keiretsu groups, ensuring long-term stability over short-term profit. Factories churned out steel, textiles, and automobiles. Shipyards built freighters that carried goods across oceans. Protected at home by tariffs, Japanese firms competed fiercely abroad, building global dominance in cars, cameras, televisions, and semiconductors. Names like Sony, Panasonic, Honda, and Toyota became synonymous with reliability and efficiency. Workers embraced a new ethic of collective sacrifice. The promise of lifetime employment bound them to their firms. Long hours and loyalty were repaid with job security and shared prosperity. By 1968, Japan had overtaken West Germany to become the world's second largest economy. The Japanese miracle became a symbol of how far determination, discipline, and organization could carry a nation. But as history shows, rapid ascent often carries hidden risks, and Japan's miracle was about to collide with the gravity of financial excess. Enter the bubble years. The 1980s marked the height of Japan's power and the seeds of its downfall. In 1985, under pressure from the United States and Europe, Japan signed the Plaza Accord. The agreement pushed the yen higher to reduce Japan's massive trade surplus. A strong yen, real estate speculation, and easy credit created one of the greatest asset bubbles in history. Its financial power was staggering. Japanese banks held 7 of the world's 10 largest banks by assets in 1989. The Nikkei stock index surged to nearly 39,000 points by 1989, more than double its level just 3 years earlier. But the most absurd symbol was real estate. The Imperial Palace grounds were valued higher than the entire state of California. Land in Tokyo's commercial Ginza district was said to be worth $200,000 per square meter, making it the most expensive property market on Earth. The Bank of Japan's loose monetary policy cut interest rates to just 2.5% by 1987, fueled speculation. Asset prices detached from reality. Ordinary citizens speculated in stocks and property. Corporations used inflated assets as collateral to borrow even more. Banks lent freely, confident that land values could never fall. To the world, Japan looked invincible, a disciplined society that had cracked the code of capitalism. Books predicted Japan's inevitable supremacy. Politicians warned of an economic takeover. In America, the sale of Rockefeller Center to a Japanese firm symbolized the shift in global power. But bubbles, by definition, burst. In the early 1990s, land and stock prices collapsed. The Nikkei lost over half its value within 2 years. Real estate values fell by 80% in some areas. Trillions of dollars in paper wealth vanished. Banks were left with mountains of bad loans. Instead of forcing bankruptcies, they rolled debt forward, creating zombie companies, firms too weak to grow, too connected to fail. The economy slowed, but wages and prices barely adjusted. When bubbles burst, they leave more than broken balance sheets. They leave broken decades. And for Japan, the collapse of the 1990s would not be a temporary setback, but the beginning of a long stagnation. Thus began Japan's lost decades. From 1991 onward, Japan's economy stagnated. GDP growth averaged 1% per year, far below the pace of the US or China. The consequences of the early 1990s bubble burst were seismic. Banks, having lent aggressively against inflated collateral, were saddled with non-performing loans. The financial system teetered, businesses unable to cover their interest, surviving only through continued lending. By 1997, financial institutions representing 13% of the system's assets had failed. Government bailouts exceeded 60 trillion yen, $500 billion. The government tried to fight the slowdown with stimulus spending. Highways, bridges, dams, and tunnels were built across the country, but these public works often went unused, earning Japan the reputation for bridges to nowhere. Japan entered a deflationary spiral. Interest rates were cut to nearly zero. The Bank of Japan pioneered policies later known as quantitative easing, pumping liquidity into the system. Yet, growth never returned to its former pace. Deflation set in, prices fell, wages stagnated, and households hoarded cash, leading to a decline in consumer spending. Unemployment, traditionally low, doubled to 5.4% in 2002. Modest by Western standards, but shocking for Japan. 2 lost decades followed. By 2017, Japan's GDP was only 2.6% higher than in 1997, a painfully slow annualized climb of about 0.13%. It wasn't just an economic slowdown, it was a societal shift, a nation trapped in deflation, stuck between the echo of its bubble past and the inertia of its future. Japan, once a byword of dynamism, became the global example of stagnation. Yet, economics is never just numbers. Beneath GDP charts and interest rates lay a deeper, slower-moving crisis, one written into the population itself. Even as the economy slowed, Japan's population was aging rapidly. The country's population peaked at 128 million in 2010. Today, it has fallen to around 125 million. And by 2050, the United Nations projects it will drop below 100 million. This decline is driven by one of the world's lowest fertility rates. In 2023, Japan recorded a fertility rate of just 1.26 births per woman, far below the replacement level of 2.1. That year also marked a grim milestone. Fewer than 800,000 babies were born, the lowest figure since records began in 1899. Meanwhile, over 1.6 million deaths were recorded, meaning Japan lost population at a pace over 800,000 people per year. Life expectancy, on the other hand, soared, the highest in the world. By 2010, more than 1 in 5 Japanese citizens was over 65. Today, it is nearly 1 in 3. This shift reshaped the nation. Rural towns emptied out, schools closed, elderly citizens outnumbered children in countless communities. The workforce shrank, putting pressure on younger generations. Japan resisted large-scale immigration, leaving it with few ways to replenish its population. The result was a slow-motion demographic collapse. This demographic reality made recovery even harder. Fewer workers meant less output, less consumption, and more pressure on pensions and healthcare. Pensions, healthcare, and elder care already account for over 30% of the national budget, and will climb further as dependency ratios worsen. In 1960, there were 11 working-age Japanese for every retiree. Today, there are just 2.1. By 2050, the ratio could fall below 1.5. An aging society, supported by a dwindling base of taxpayers, left the government shouldering ever greater costs. The result was a mountain of public debt. By the 2000s, Japan's debt exceeded 200% of GDP, the highest of any developed nation. Today, it is closer to 260%. The numbers are stark, but they don't tell the whole story, because even as Japan aged and debt piled up, the nation endured, stable, orderly, but stagnant. To understand this limbo, we must look at Japan today. Despite 3 lost decades, Japan remains the world's 3rd largest economy. Its cities are among the safest, cleanest, and most efficient in the world. Its infrastructure is modern. Its trains are punctual to the second. Life expectancy is among the highest on Earth. Unemployment is low. Inequality, though rising, remains modest compared to the United States. Poverty exists, but there are no vast slums, no runaway crime. And Japanese companies continue to shape global culture. Toyota leads in hybrid vehicles, Nintendo in gaming, Sony in entertainment, Uniqlo in fashion. In robotics, precision engineering, and animation, Japan still holds a unique edge. But underneath this surface, cracks remain. Japan's productivity lags behind global peers. According to the OECD, output per hour worked is roughly 60% of US levels, and about 70% of Germany's. The country excels in technology and innovation, but inefficiencies persist across services, small enterprises, and rigid labor markets. Wages adjusted for inflation are lower today than they were in the early 1990s. Unemployment remains low at around 2.6%, but this conceals underemployment, a rise from 20.3% in 2004 to 37.5% in 2016, in part-time or non-regular positions with lower pay and fewer benefits. Many young workers face job insecurity instead of the lifetime employment once guaranteed to their parents. Innovation thrives in niches but lags in digital transformation. The internet revolution largely passed Japan by. The result? Stability without dynamism, wealth without momentum. The state remains heavily indebted, yet bond yields stay near zero. Why? Because the debt is held domestically by Japanese savers, pension funds, and institutions. As long as faith in the system endures, crisis can be delayed, but it cannot be postponed forever. And demographics continue to tighten the noose. Entire villages vanish as their last residents die. Meanwhile, Tokyo swells, its neon glow masking the emptiness spreading across the countryside. Japan's current state is not collapse, it is something quieter, a slow erosion of growth, wages, and confidence. A nation rich in resources, talent, and infrastructure, but caught in the grip of stagnation. And here we arrive at the paradox, a paradox that has resisted every attempt at reform. So why has Japan struggled to reignite growth? Well, here lies Japan's paradox. It has achieved much of what other societies aspire to: universal healthcare, clean cities, world-class infrastructure, low crime, long life expectancy. And yet, it is locked in economic stagnation. Growth is weak. Debt is massive. The population is shrinking. The dynamism of the 1960s and 1980s has given way to resignation. One reason is deflationary psychology. For more than 2 decades, consumers have lived in an economy where prices either stagnated or fell. When households expect goods to cost less tomorrow, they delay spending, suppressing demand. Rigid labor markets compound the problem. Lifetime employment and seniority-based wages protect insiders but exclude younger generations. This creates a dual economy, stable for the older generation, precarious for the young. Add to this the political turnover. Since 1990, Japan has had 17 prime ministers. Policy continuity is rare, and structural reform often stalls before it takes root. In the 2010s, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe launched Abenomics, a bold program of monetary easing, fiscal stimulus, and structural reforms. The Bank of Japan slashed interest rates to negative 0.1% and embarked on quantitative easing unprecedented in scale. By 2020, the bank owned 45% of all outstanding government bonds. GDP growth briefly improved, averaging 1.3% between 2013 and 2019, compared to 0.6% in the decade before. The stock market surged and corporate profits rose to record highs. For a moment, it seemed Japan might finally break free. But structural reform, the third arrow, lagged. Labor markets remained rigid, productivity gains modest. Women's participation increased, but Japan still ranked 116th out of 146 countries in the World Economic Forum's 2022 Global Gender Gap Index. COVID-19 halted momentum. Growth slipped back to near zero, and deflationary pressures returned. Abenomics stabilized Japan. It restored confidence in financial markets, but it did not solve the paradox, which brings us to the haunting reflection on Japan's future. Japan's story is not one of collapse, but it is shadowed by profound uncertainty. A society where wealth persists but dynamism fades, where the streets shine but the population dwindles, where the present feels safe but the future feels empty. The nation retains enormous strengths. It is still the world's third largest economy, producing $4.2 trillion in nominal GDP. It commands one of the largest net international investment positions globally, exceeding $3.5 trillion in foreign assets. Its companies remain leaders in robotics, automotive engineering, and precision manufacturing. But the challenges are formidable, and yet there are opportunities. Japan has quietly become a testing ground for automation and AI in an aging society. Companies like Fanuc and SoftBank Robotics are building technologies to offset labor shortages. The green economy is another avenue. Japan has pledged to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, requiring massive investment in renewable energy and hydrogen infrastructure. If successful, these could anchor a new growth model, one not based on population size, but on technology, efficiency, and sustainability. But the haunting question remains: is Japan unique, shaped by its own history, culture, and choices? Or is it simply the first, an early glimpse of what awaits all advanced economies as they confront aging populations, slowing growth, and unpayable debts?